4.9% higher. Now, in part, that's due to the positive sentiment around the crown jewel holding, Tencent, following media reports that China may restart online game approvals soon. Earning reports from both, incidentally, are due on the 22nd of November. Nigeria's main index is nearly 8% higher so far in the year. Airtel shares were 4.4% higher over there, even with under 1 million shares traded today. Here's what's coming up tonight. 6 people have been killed in a twin suicide attack in Uganda's capital, Kampala. Authorities in Zimbabwe opt to import power in order to contain a serious energy crisis. And all producers are calling for inclusivity in the debate around carbon emissions. Our starting point tonight is in East Africa, Uganda to be specific. At least 6 people have been killed, over 30 others have been injured in twin bombings in the Ugandan capital, Kampala. Police say that the attacks were carried out by 3 suicide bombers on motorbikes. One explosion occurred very close to Parliament and the other close to the central police station. Police have blamed the attacks on the Allied Democratic Forces. It's an armed group operating essentially on the western end of the country, close to the border with the DRC, and affiliated to ISIL. Hilary Ayesiga is on the ground in Kampala following developments in the wake of those blasts, and he filed this report.
A suspected suicide bomber walks along a Kampala street, and a few seconds later, a loud bang is heard.
I just had a bomb blast, boom! So I was wondering, was it a tire burst? So when I saw people running, as the mayor of Kampala Central, it was my duty to see people are safe in this town. So I ran towards the police station and yes, it's true, a bomb blast went off.
Dozens of people were injured in 2 blasts, along with those who were killed. Just a few meters from here where I'm standing is Kampala's Central Police Station, where one of the bombs exploded. Now police is still investigating who could have carried out this attack. Preliminary investigations by police link the attack to the Allied Democratic Forces, a Ugandan rebel group operating in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
The hallmarks of the attack clearly indicate that the ADF-linked radicalized groups who still have a desire to carry out lethal attacks on soft targets using suicide attackers and improvised explosive devices.
Those attacks come 22 days after the last suicide bomb attack on a restaurant. Police are now tightening security to prevent future attacks.
Today's attacks still shows that there's a lot of work to do. We are going to try as much as possible to preempt, penetrate and prevent other deadly attacks of this nature by domestic extremists.
Police are asking locals to be vigilant. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
All right, then let's bring you up to speed with the latest on this story. Leon Senyange joins us now live from Kampala. So, Leon, what's the latest on the number of people who've been killed and injured in today's explosions?
Well, what the authorities have told us is that 6 people were killed in the explosions. 3 of those were the suicide bombers and 3 other Ugandans were killed. And the downside to that is that, further one, is that there were 33 people injured in the attack. 5 are critically injured in hospital. The greater majority of the 33 were actually police constables. A total number there of about 23 were injured in this incident. Now, one would wonder why all this number of police constables. Many of these were those standing by and guarding the key areas at the Central Police Post and also on the street along the Parliament building. So those are actually some of the numbers of the casualties from the bomb attacks today.
Walk us through what we know so far, or at least what the police have said, on how exactly these attacks were carried out and by whom.
Well, the attacks occurred just slightly after 10 a.m. The authorities telecast a CCTV material of these particular incidences. The first one at 10:03 local time, a gentleman is seen carrying a backpack, quite heavy it looked, and walked past 2 police pickups, and suddenly the bang, the explosion therein, and the cloud of smoke. So, of course, the stampede around is visible in the telecast video. Glasses in the nearby building were shattered. And now, just 3 minutes later, at 10:06, again, local time, what the authorities tell us is that two suicide bombers on a motorcycle rode on a street not far away from the Parliament building and detonated the bombs there. Suddenly, that, of course, has sent a shock through the city, through Kampala, through the authorities. And what the authorities have said is that this may, of course, be linked to the ADF, the Allied Democratic Forces, a rebel group that is operating and has operated in the western part of the country. The further details of these, of course, we may definitely get to know in the next coming days, but it's not the first incident to be linked to the ADF. Several others, and most recently, the last 32 days, where a bomb killed 2 people at an eatery. There was also another bomb in a bus traveling to the western part of the country, and all of these have been linked to the ADF. So the ADF particularly seem the major suspects in this.
All right, so major suspects, as you point out, and the police spokesperson, of course, said that the intelligence they have links it back to the ADF. But have they made any of this intelligence public? What is the ADF's endgame here?
Well, it's still not certain what the ADF is in to gain in this particular act. The police, of course, have put it out there. And like I said earlier, it's not entirely the first time that an incident of this nature has occurred in the recent past and has been linked to the ADF. They are the first go-to suspects in incidences of this nature. It's now known entirely that occurrences of this nature are very likely going to be linked to the ADF. Again, the authorities are trying to pick several of the other remnants of the groups that have tried to form out of the ADF. Maybe just one other detail to add to this is that it was not just 3 suicide bombers. A 4th was subdued by the authorities on the outskirts of the capital, Kampala. Explosive devices were discovered in his house. He's now in police custody. So there's quite a lot of work for the authorities to do in trying to bring a stop to the activities of the ADF here.
All right, one last question for you, Leon. So on the 15th of October, I believe, the United Kingdom has issued a terror alert in Uganda. Do we know if that warning, roughly a month ago, do we know if that warning was linked in any way to today's triple blasts?
Well, the timing of it, of course, tells quite a lot about the incidences that have occurred after that alert. Unfortunately, there's been some criticism towards the authorities on the way they carried on with that kind of information. The authorities felt that regardless of whether the warnings came through, they had just the sufficient security intelligence to deal with whatever circumstances would have come. Unfortunately, they actually came too soon. So, the authorities are being criticized for how they handled that particular information. But now, 3 situations have occurred. Bomb attacks have occurred in a space of approximately 25 days. So it leaves a lot to worry on what the authorities are entirely doing, how much they're able to gather around the particular information that comes to them. How then quicker can they work towards stopping any further occurrences? So yes, there's little connection with the alerts that came through from the UK, but of course it goes without doubt to the fact that the Ugandan government had to be prepared for any occurrences of this nature.
Indeed. We'll leave there for the time being. Leon Sanyanga there live for us in Kampala. From East Africa to West Africa, Nigeria's inflation slowed down to a 10-month low in the month of October as consumer prices went up by 15.99%. Now compare that to September's reading of 16.6%. But as Philly Hazanau reports from the nation's federal capital of Abuja, the majority of people in Africa's largest economy say they're really not feeling that drop in prices.
Prices of commodities dropped by 1.23% from last month, but rose slightly by 1.76% when compared to the same month last year. The NBS says inflation rate in urban areas is worse in the rural areas. Products like beverages, eggs, bread, cereals, and staple foods are still high in stores like this across the country. In spite of the marginal drop this month, it's a burden for many consumers who think the reality on ground is even worse.
Since this year, we've been experiencing a continuous hike in the cost of goods. The government has to do something about this.
It's really sad that one incomes remain the same, but the number of things you can buy continue to reduce because of all these increments.
Inflation is still something that more than 80 million Nigerians who live below the $1.90 a day will have to deal with. The country's minimum wage is about $80 per month. Nigeria has been battling inflation since bouncing back from a recession last year caused by a COVID-19 pandemic and a fall in crude oil prices, a main source of revenue for the economy. The government says it's optimistic that things will get better as business activities pick up within the country and on a global scale. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
On to North Africa. Egypt's central bank has approved regulations designed to allow people to make instantaneous electronic payments between bank accounts using their mobile phones. A new network to that end will be launched by the end of the year. It's designed to allow customers to manage all the bank accounts and complete transfers with any bank through a single app. Yasser Kim explores how this will work.
Egypt has over the last 2 years introduced a series of new legislation and regulatory changes designed to unleash fintech investments and change the way the country's largely unbanked citizens do business. The Instant Payments Network, which was recently adopted by the central bank, will speed up the process. Currently, the system allows transfers of funds after 2 to 4 hours from the transfer order or next working day if the transfer request arrived after 2 p.m. local time.
The Instant Payment Network is a web connecting banks and financial services to allow transfers and transactions on the spot. Banks are currently testing the infrastructure for this web. The clients will be able to make the transfers through online banking or mobile apps with a limit for daily transfers at 50,000 Egyptian pounds for each transaction or 60,000 Egyptian pounds total per day.
Mohammed Hassan leads an investment firm that works in stock brokerage, asset management, and invests in bonds and treasury bills. He says the new system has been long overdue.
We are a medium-sized company, not a large one. I transfer 1 or 2 billion Egyptian pounds a month, so I need instant transactions. For instance, if the client these days deposits money in our fund at noon, we cannot transfer the money for investments on time and we miss a profit opportunity. The instant payment will help me invest better and gain higher returns for my investments.
Experts say the Central Bank Instant Payments Network, or IPN, is part of a long-time comprehensive strategy for financial inclusion that had accelerated in the last 4 years.
We are trying to keep up with international standards in financial services and to complete our digital transformation strategy set by the state. It has other benefits in improving financial management, supporting a cashless economy, and encouraging the informal sector to merge into the formal economy.
The IPN is solely for transfers inside Egypt and will not handle foreign transactions. Banks have already applied for license to the IPNs and should be ready for implementation during the first quarter of 2022. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Now, Ethiopia's year-long conflict has come at a massive human cost. Thousands killed, millions displaced within and outside the country, an estimated 350,000 more in desperate need of food aid in the country's northern frontier. But that's not the only damage being done. The 13-month-long conflict so far has come with a huge economic cost as well that could take years to repair. CGTN's Nick Mudimba explores the implications.
Ethiopia's internal conflict in the Tigray region risks unraveling years of economic and social progress at a time when weak revenues and elevated external vulnerability as a result of the global coronavirus crisis. Ethiopia's overall economic growth for this year is forecast to slow significantly from 6% in 2020 to just 2% in 2021, the lowest level in almost 2 decades, according to the IMF. The country imports about $14 billion of goods per year, while it exports just $3.4 billion. Also worrying economic observers is Ethiopia's national debt, which some expect to reach $60 billion this year, or nearly 70% of GDP.
There is heavy fighting in relation to the operation of the law enforcement in the north. All the people of Ethiopia must come forward and help end this. Otherwise, if it continues like this, the economy will be hugely affected.
The war that has lasted for nearly a year has been disrupting supply chains, and as United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres told the Security Council in August, it has drained $1 billion from Ethiopia's coffers.
The country is facing an immense humanitarian crisis that demands immediate attention. I urge the government to allow the unrestricted movement of desperately needed fuel, cash, communications equipment and humanitarian supplies into all the regions in need.
Inflation has risen on average by 30.4%, according to the Central Statistical Authority. Food inflation reached 37.6% in August, the highest in 10 years. The continuation of conflict presents a further roadblock to an economy ravaged by the COVID-19 pandemic. The IMF has forecast 0% GDP growth in real terms in 2021. Fighting in Tigray has prompted several companies to suspend operations in the region, including European and Asian textile, agribusiness and manufacturing firms. Foreign direct investment inflow into Ethiopia reached $3.9 billion in the recently concluded 2020-2021 fiscal year, data from the Ethiopian Investment Commission showed. But if there's no ceasefire, confidence among investors may wane. As the war continues unabated and the production of export items ceases, Ethiopia could face its highest ever budget deficit. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
All right, then let's start our company news wrap with ShopRite. Investors in the firm, holding nearly about 41% of ordinary shares over there, voted against the remuneration package of its top executives during the firm's AGM. ShopRite CEO Peter Engelbrecht received $1.9 million in the last year. That's 12% higher year on year. As recently as 2019, he got about $1.4 million. Shareholders also voted to re-elect directors to the board, but they voted against the former chair, Chris Tavisa, as a director. Tanzania's government has ordered 4 new aircraft to add to its national carriers fleet. On Tuesday at the 2021 Dubai Air Show, Boeing in Tanzania announced an order of a 787-8 Dreamliner, a 767-300 freighter and 2 737 MAX jets. Now, the planes combined have a value of about $726 million at list prices, and they'll be run by Air Tanzania. The planes will help to expand the service from the country to new markets in Africa, Asia and in Europe as well. The International Public Health Group, Medicine's patent pool has welcomed Pfizer's decision to allow generic manufacturers to supply its experimental antiviral COVID-19 pill to 95 low and middle income countries. Now, the voluntary licensing agreement between Pfizer on one hand and the MPP on the other will allow the United Nations-backed group to grant sub-licenses to qualified generic drug makers to make their own versions of PF 0732133. Now, Pfizer will be selling the pills it manufactures under the brand name of Paxlovid. And finally, Google has announced that it will be investing about $740 million in Australia over the next 5 years in what the US tech giant is saying is the largest investment in the country to date. Google says the money will be used to build a research hub to increase its cloud computing capacity, but also to fund partnerships with local organizations. Now, the move is being described as a digital future initiative. It's expected to create some 6,000 jobs directly and support some 28,000 more overall. That's a run through your company headlines. We're 20 minutes into the hour. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. Zimbabwe's opted to import power in order to contain a serious electricity crisis. And ahead of tomorrow's budget, traders in Ghana calling for tax cuts in order to cope with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business. Welcome back. Let's talk about power in Zimbabwe. The country's utilities, ZESA Holdings, will be importing up to 400 or so megawatts of generation capacity from Mozambique and Zambia. Now, that's part of measures to end a crippling power crisis. Zimbabwe has long been blighted by long periods of load shedding. Authorities over there spending up to $20 million of very scarce foreign currency on power imports every month. ZESA's executive chair, Sydney Gata, says that the situation is partly to be blamed on delays by the Finance Ministry in signing an independent power producer implementation agreement. Now, in order to meet domestic power demand, Zimbabwe needs to have at least 2,200 megawatts of operational generation capacity, plus reserves, of course. But right now, only 63% of that is operational. Despite being an oil and gas exporter, Ghana's economy is struggling with rising inflation. Supply chain disruptions have led to a surge in retail fuel prices, and that has driven headline inflation to a 15-month high, around 11% in the month of October. As CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai now reports, traders in the West African nation are demanding tax cuts if their businesses are to stay afloat.
Sadia Umaru is having a slow business day in this market in Accra. She says people are not buying her grains.
When I tell people the price of the grains, they complain it is too expensive. I sit here all day and hardly make any sales.
Sadia says she's had to increase the price of the grains 5 times this year. It's because the cost of transporting the food to the market has gone up due to hikes in fuel prices. So she passes the extra cost to consumers.
I buy the grains from northern Ghana, Nigeria, Burkina Faso and other neighboring countries. And I pay a lot of money to transport the goods to Accra. I barely make profits when I sell the grains.
Fuel prices have gone up 9 times this year in Ghana. The increases in fuel prices are mainly linked to changes on global markets.
But it is already feeding through to inflation in other sectors of Ghana's economy. The cost of goods and services have shot up to 11% in October from 10.6% in September.
The government has scrapped some taxes on petroleum products to cushion consumers. It has removed the price stabilization and recovery levy of 16 pesos per litre of petrol and 14 pesos per litre of diesel. But analysts want the government to be more realistic about how it manages the economy.
Make sure whatever you are going to project, you can easily spend to meet that. It's as simple as that. And the people will believe you. But then if you read a budget and you raise the people's hope as if, there's future for petroleum prices, there's future for giving them roads and all those. Meanwhile, the thing is not there. If government takes off taxes, it's going to be suicidal. That's why I said the government needs to come out clear and tell the people that this is the situation we are faced with. And we have to take the pain now for a good future.
Still, Sadia Umaru wants more taxes on fuel to be cut. She believes her business will only bounce back when she is able to reduce the prices of her grains when she pays less to transport the food. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
On to East Africa. Tanzania's government, Shell and Equinor have resumed talks regarding a host government agreement for the country's proposed $30 billion LNG project. That particular project has been essentially on ice since 2019. As CGTN's Daniel Kijo now reports, the government is hoping to reach an agreement with the fossil fuel firms before the end of the year.
After more than 3 years of pause, the Tanzanian government says it is hoping to come to an agreement with the companies by end of this year. The deal between Tanzania and Royal Dutch Shell and Norwegian company Equinor will see the two companies build an LNG terminal in Lindi. Talks originally started in 2014, but postponement to the previous administration impacted foreign investors' outlook for the industry. Anglo-Dutch giant Shell and Norwegian major Equinox plan to harvest gas from offshore blocks into a plant that can produce 10 million tons of liquefied gas per annum. Along with exporting the gas, the project is expected to offer employment opportunities, support local industries and businesses in its value chain. It is also expected to lower the cost of power generation for Tanzania, which is key for providing cheap energy for its growing industry. The long-awaited host government agreement will spell out the entire project and will establish the commercial, fiscal and legal framework to ensure that the project can move ahead. Officials from the Energy Ministry say the project involves a lot of money and is the duty of the government to ensure the country gets its fair share. They are hoping to finalize all talks in early 2022. Tanzania has an estimated 57.7 trillion cubic feet of natural gas reserves. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa says it's time for the Made in Africa label to take off. He made those comments as he officially opened the Intra-African Trade Fair in Durban. The week-long event is aimed at accelerating intra-African trade while growing the domestic manufacturing sector on the continent. CGTN's Julie Shire is there.
Delegates were treated to a traditional South African welcome at the Intra-African Trade Fair. It's the first fair to take place since the Continental Free Trade Agreement came into effect in January this year. Hosting President Cyril Ramaphosa joined several other heads of state who committed to accelerating trade on the continent.
This AFCTA of ours aspires to create a single market for goods and services across our 55 countries on our continent. This trade fair will further cement its position as Africa's premier trade platform, where African manufacturers and producers can promote and sell more goods labeled Made in Africa.
Africa is home to 1.3 billion people. Ramaphosa says much of the continent's progress, trade networks and business ties were destroyed by colonialism. But Africa is now taking concrete steps to write its own economic success story.
We can no longer have a situation where the resources of Africa provide employment and add value in other economies, while so many of our people live in poverty and conditions of underemployment. By promoting trade between African countries, we are strengthening our own continent's industrial base.
COVID-19 has exposed much of the continent's frailties around food, medicines and other essential supplies. But there's now a chance to strengthen supply chains.
The AFCTA will provide new export opportunities for Made in Africa products and enable member countries to trade with each other without tariffs or other hindrances. All of this will in the end help the continent to absorb the young people on our continent looking to enter the job market annually.
Trade between African countries stands at less than 20%. Leaders here are confident of a slight boost this week. At least $40 billion of deals are expected in Durban, topping the previous total when the continent last met in 2018. Julie Shara, CGTN, Durban, South Africa.
Back up north now, Huawei has awarded prizes to Tunisian and Libyan ICT students who graduated from this year's Seeds for the Future program. The Chinese tech firm says it plans to invest $150 million in digital talent development in the next 5 years, and that might benefit about 3 million young people across the continent. Alan Chuachi has the numbers.
Huawei ICT Academy is the result of a successful cooperation between the Chinese tech giant and Tunisian universities. The program aims to develop local ICT talent, improve knowledge transfer, and improve people's understanding and interest in the ICT sector. Seeds for the Future encourages Tunisians to participate in the construction of the digital society.
Seeds for the Future is the fruit of a successful cooperation between Tunisia and China in the ICT sector, which is a vital sector for our country. Our students achieve very good results domestically and internationally when the right environment and means are available.
The Seeds for the Future is a program aiming to develop the top skills of the country, including the best students. This year, the special thing is that we are including Tunisian and Libyan students for a common session to make more experience sharing between these two countries and have more collaboration for the future.
The 2021 edition of Seeds for the Future brought together for the first time Tunisia and Libya. This event is an opportunity for students from the two North African countries to show their potential in emerging technologies.
I have enjoyed this experience. I have learned so much from the leading tech giant in the world. I thank Huawei for sharing its knowledge and the latest technology with engineering students from Libya.
We've learned group work during this intensive training. Technology is the pillar of the digital economy. I thank the organizers of this project for giving students hope for a better future.
Engineering students assert that Huawei's Seeds for the Future will have a positive impact on the technological ecosystems of Tunisia and Libya.
I am interested in 5G technology, artificial intelligence and cloud computing. The Seeds for the Future program enables all students to understand and deepen their knowledge about the latest technologies in the world.
Seeds for the Future. The Chinese ambassador to Tunisia called for cultivating digital talents and making them among the fundamental rights of young people. Technology experts say that the ICT Academy was established in more than 50 universities thanks to the strategic partnership between Huawei and the Higher Education Department in Tunis. More than 4,000 students have completed the online courses, while more than 600 engineering students have been certified in the fields of artificial intelligence, cloud and networking. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
You're watching Global Business Africa. It's after a short break. Here's what's coming up next. Well, producers are calling for inclusivity in the debate around carbon emissions. And we'll get into a high-tech expo that's drawing global attention to investment in a slice of virtual reality.
Change is on the horizon. Through the shifting of time, Africa's emerging tech landscape is creating new channels.
There's a hunger for local African content globally.
Shaped by innovation, carved out by a new generation of digital entrepreneurs, sculpted by a mobile revolution, and trickling down to the most remote corners of the continent. TechSpot is seeking out the new concepts in technology, disrupting Africa's traditional sectors.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
Welcome to the world today on CGTN.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
Only on CGTN.
Welcome back. These are some of the stories making your headlines at this hour. Let's start in Uganda. At least 6 people have been killed there. Over 30 more have been injured in twin bombings in the capital, Kampala. Police say that the attacks were carried out by 3 suicide bombers on motorbikes. One explosion occurred very close to Parliament and the other near the central police station. Police blame the attacks on the Allied Democratic Forces. It's an armed group affiliated to Islamic State and based in the eastern end of the Democratic Republic of Congo. In Kenya, 3 terror suspects have escaped from a maximum security prison close to the capital, Nairobi. One of the escaped inmates is Mohammed Ali Abekar. He was serving a 41-year sentence for his involvement in the attack on Garissa University back in 2015. That attack killed 148 people. Most of them were just young students. Abekar escaped from Committee Maximum Security Prison along with 2 other inmates. Kenyan authorities are offering a reward of $536,000 for information that could lead to their recapture. Up north, Libya's eastern commander, Khalifa Haftar, has announced that he will be running in the country's presidential elections due to take place in December. In a televised speech, Haftar said the elections were the only way out of the crisis for Libya, which has suffered chaos and conflict ever since the revolution that ousted Muammar Gaddafi back in 2011. Through a force known as the Libyan National Army, Haftar's waged war on factions in the west after the country essentially split back in 2014. And finally, Sudan's political crisis continues to threaten the country's economy. The Sudanese people continue to struggle with high inflation, well above average food prices, and deep uncertainty about the future. Weeks after the military seized control following protests and a blockade of the country's main port, essential goods are still scarce, and when they can be found, they're very expensive. That's a run through your headlines. Let's dive into the world of energy for the next couple of stories. Energy producers gathered in Abu Dhabi in the wake of the COP26 UN climate talks, and they're calling for greater inclusivity, as they see it, that would see more investment in hydrocarbons for energy security, as at the same time they work to reduce emissions while developing economies.
The COP26 talks in Glasgow ended on Saturday, and for the first time, the meet concluded with a deal targeting fossil fuels as the key driver of global warming.
And if we are to successfully transition to the energy system of tomorrow, we cannot simply unplug from the energy system of today. We cannot just flip a switch. Distinguished delegates, we must, of course, prioritize investments toward the most cost and carbon efficient barrels. And following the wise guidance of our leadership in the United Arab Emirates, this is exactly the approach we are taking at ADNOC.
OPEC oil producers at the Glasgow summit defended a future role for fossil fuels, arguing that the world could slash greenhouse gas emissions without swearing off oil and gas.
There is no doubt that the conversation is gradually being taken over by emotions. It's very clear to us that the science is being gradually kept aside. The decisions being taken are not being driven by hard data and facts. And I think there is a great opportunity for these 2 countries to bring back all this on track in a very, very inclusive manner. They have an excellent track record, very good leadership and capacity to do that. So all is not lost. I think there is hope that we will be able to eventually not only address climate change, but do it in a sustainable manner that will not leave anyone or any sector behind.
Advocates of oil, gas and coal have long argued that technologies like carbon capture and sequestration, in which emissions are captured and stored underground, can allow economies to keep burning fossils. Climate activists, on the other hand, reject that, saying that such technology is expensive, unproven at scale, and only provides cover for polluting industries to continue operating. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Still in the world of commodities, Royal Dutch Shell has announced a major overhaul of its legal and tax structure that will see the company essentially walk away from the Netherlands, well, at least as far as taxes are concerned. Now, the move is amid deteriorating relations with what has been its home country for the better part of a century now. The company adds that it will help to facilitate returns to shareholders and make it a lot simpler to change up its portfolio of assets. At the same time, it has committed to transitioning to low-carbon energy. It also plans to eliminate its current dual share structure, drop the Royal Dutch part from its name, relocate its tax residents to the United Kingdom and move its top executives from The Hague all the way to London. All right, then, that's quite the move. So let's explore the latest developments in this story. Elena Casas joins us now live on the program. Elena, what's the latest on the Dutch government's efforts to scrap that 15% withholding tax that Shell and Unilever had been making so much noise about?
Well, the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, who it's worth pointing out began his own career at Unilever, which left the Netherlands because of this very tax last year, has been trying to scrap it for some time. Shell alone isn't going to be that major a loss to the Dutch taxman. It paid $212 million in the Netherlands in 2020 out of a global tax bill of $3.4 billion. But of course, this is a blow to the country's prestige. And the Economic Affairs Minister, Stef Blok, reacted by writing to the heads of all the political parties in the Dutch Parliament on Monday to try and drum up support for scrapping the dividend tax. But the government was forced to ditch this plan once already in 2018 after opposition from voters who saw the move as a gift to foreign shareholders. There's no indication the move would be more successful or more popular this time round.
And let's take a different argument to this. What is it about this 15% tax that Shell finds to be so objectionable? As you point out, it's just a $200 million tax bill for them. And in the Netherlands, it's not exactly a large amount of money we're talking about here.
No, it's not, and it's also worth saying that the Netherlands is certainly far from unique in Europe in having this type of dividend tax. Lots of countries have it, but Shell has been trying to get it scrapped in the Netherlands for years. The company says it makes it impossible to simplify its complex dual share structure, so it's complicated and expensive for any company to have boards in two different jurisdictions. And in Shell's case, the tax rule meant that its A shares, which are subject to that tax and are mostly held by Dutch investors, couldn't be unified with its B shares, which are free of the charges. That makes it difficult for Shell to buy back its own shares, and it makes any future deals or acquisitions very clunky. Those shares should now be more attractive to buyers, since none of them will now be subject to the dividend tax. But the international dual listing that Shell has is falling out of favour generally. A lot of companies that used to be listed both here in London on the FTSE and in other countries are now choosing to simplify things. So Shell certainly isn't the first company recently to do that.
Indeed, and yet they're still going to be keeping listings in Amsterdam and in London. So the UK Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, he's basically described this as a vote of confidence. But isn't this really just about getting into a tax domicile that's a lot more beneficial from Shell's perspective?
Well, I think it's probably a stretch to say that the state of the British economy is Shell's board's primary concern here. There are several things at play, other than tax concerns. In May, a Dutch court ordered Shell to deepen its planned greenhouse gas emissions cuts in order to align with the Paris climate deal. The court said its current emissions targets were not only inadequate but also illegal, and it must slash emissions by 45% by 2030. Shell says it's already going to do that wherever it's headquartered, and it claims that moving to a single class of shares will make the energy transition easier. But Shell is only counting the emissions from its own operations. The Dutch court was including all of the emissions produced by the companies that are burning its products. So, of course, there's a huge difference there.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Adios, Den Haag, and hello, London. Elena Casas there, live, of course, in the UK for us. Now, the supply chain strains that we're seeing around the world, it's a huge global problem, and it's driven by the unleashed pent-up demand during the pandemic. Now, while of course it's critical for the biggest retailers, there's potentially a lot more at stake for the smallest, as Owen Fairclough reports from Baltimore, a crucial port city in the United States.
Cargo ships in a traffic jam at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. For the US, a visible sign of global supply chains in trouble. And for a consumption-driven economy like the US, heading into the most critical sales period of the year, it's a problem that's forced the White House to step in.
COVID-19 has stretched global supply chains like never before. And suddenly, when you go to order a pair of sneakers or a bicycle or Christmas presents for the family, you're met with higher prices and long delays, or they say they just don't have any at all.
Some US ports are now working around the clock to reduce the backlog, while Savannah, Georgia is sending shipping containers by rail deep inland for distribution.
In just a matter of months, the intricacies of container shipping and supply chains has been transformed from a fairly dry internal discussion for most companies into an international crisis. But rather than waiting for a coordinated solution, some companies are now literally taking the ships into their own hands.
They're spending millions of dollars chartering their own ships that they can send to other ports rather than getting snarled up in the backlog. But solutions on this scale are beyond the reach of America's 30 million or so small businesses. So what can they do?
You can automate pretty much anything in your organization, any of your backend processes, how you actually interact with your vendors, how you actually look at your stocks within the organization, how you analyze which stock has to be ordered, etc. A low-code automation is not too expensive in the sense you're not chartering a flight or ship to do that.
President Biden wants to prevent a repeat of the current snags by spending $17 billion from his infrastructure program on upgrading ports so they can accommodate the biggest and most efficient container ships. But small businesses may not be able to wait for that kind of long-term solution. By some estimates, just 44% of America's small businesses have cash reserves that will barely last 3 months. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Baltimore.
When Facebook changed its name to Meta, yes, there was a lot of criticism and all the interesting memes that erupted around that, but it also drew attention and investment into what is being now known as the Metaverse. It's a shared space of virtual reality, augmented reality, and a lot of interconnected worlds. CGTN's Mark New takes us to the Augmented World Expo, where people are busy creating tools to experience this new frontier.
Carving out a space in your own virtual world is what the Augmented World Expo in Silicon Valley is all about. While big, powerful headsets are around every corner, HTC has rolled out a sleeker, more portable connected eyewear, the Vive Flow, complete with washable parts and adjustable lenses.
Just by making it compact, it opens up a lot more accessibility options to people. It's not intimidating to folks who, for example, have seen headsets that have a strap around the back or over the top.
Even as virtual avatars become more and more realistic, the eyes can often appear lifeless. That's why Viewpoint System is using its technology to help avatar eyes become more animated. Its cameras fit in this tiny device, transferring valuable data in real time that tracks precisely where one is looking.
The eyes are the mirror of the soul, meaning your eyes give away a lot of information, a lot of emotion. If we can develop our technology to the level that we understand what you feel while looking at something, and to understand what's interesting for you, what's interesting for me or anyone else out there, and then provide you exactly with only that information you're interested in.
One of the growing fields for virtual and augmented applications is medicine, and particularly how to train to become a surgeon. How do I do that? Well, I'm here with Fundamental Surgery. Let's give it a try.
Feel free to just poke the prod around. You don't have to play by the rules in this particular stage.
Oh, wow. Immediately, I push this down a little bit, touch the skin, and I can feel it sort of bounce back. I'm performing a hip replacement surgery where I can actually feel the instrument grind away the bone spurs. My heart rate is picking up a little bit because I don't want to mess up this surgery. It feels so real.
That's the beauty of VR, is that you can't hurt the patient.
Thank goodness.
Kinesthetic haptics, so this is kind of force feedback, weight resistance, pressure. You can get real subtlety, which gives you the ability to really get that kind of pre-human competence, where you are actually learning what it feels like to do it right and do it wrong, and practice that again and again.
The platform also allows me to join an operating room and collaborate with other virtual surgeons around the world.
We can basically collapse time and space and put people together in a way that's never been possible before. Really important during the last couple of years with the pandemic, so allowing me to step into an operating room when I couldn't physically go in there.
Technologists we spoke to say challenges with computing power, display technology, and connectivity still hold back the expansion of the metaverse. It's still early days for Metaverse companies that are working to merge the physical and virtual into a seamless experience that looks and feels real. Mark New, CGTN, Santa Clara, California.
Now, the world's third largest film industry, that's Nigeria's Nollywood, continues to record improved growth with better stories, better equipment and groundbreaking movies too. Investments in the industry are also growing, and that's leading to the production of some big budget films. One such title is The Black Book, which is currently being shot in several locations across Nigeria. Our correspondent Deji Badimosi was invited on the set of the movie recently. He prepared the following report on what's hot tonight.
On the set of the making of what promises to be arguably Nigeria's best movie in recent times.
Nobody crossing the set, please. Nobody crossing, please.
Titled The Black Book, the movie has been touted as Nigeria's first $1 million plus budget film. It's a story about family and revenge, and a father seeking justice for his murdered son. This is the third major film by Nigerian director and producer Edith Effiong, who's made a strong showing since he ventured into the Nollywood industry about 4 years ago.
It's been 2 years and a half of planning and working. Our key pre-production started in March 2020, and so we had to hire the actors and put the actors through training. They had to go through physical training, they had to go through weapons training, they had to go through whip safety and stuff. Our lead had to lose weight, be in the gym for 6 months and lose weight and be the right weight and size. A couple of actors had to do the same thing. So it was a long process.
Shooting of the film began in January and is now been wrapped up. The cast and crew consist of about 200 people, drawn from 6 different countries. It also features some of Nigeria's top-rated actors.
This is one of the biggest movie sets right now. Not just in terms of the size of the cast and everything, but also the budget and everything, and the tactical setup it demands. It's a lot.
First of all, it's an amazing cast. Edith Effiong, our director, just put together an incredible story with an incredible cast in incredible locations. This movie is beautifully shot. One thing I really loved about the process was just the attention to detail. Edith was very particular about getting the details right. And it's not every day in Nollywood that you get to experience that. Oftentimes we shoot films so fast because we have to, budget constraints, all of that stuff. But with this film, we really took our time to get it right.
In an industry that has also churned out some low-quality films due to poor funding, The Black Book is challenging the status quo with its budget. The director says this provides more opportunities and avenues to explore more possibilities and make better quality films.
It's a big privilege for us to tell this story. And I think one of the things I'm most excited about is it's about the biggest production I've done in Nigeria ever. But it was told with Nigerian money. Every investment for this picture was raised from Nigeria, not from outside. And so I always believed that to tell the big Nigerian stories, to tell the big African stories that we need to tell, our stories, it has to be done with African money, Nigerian money. And I'm so excited that this film is being told with Nigerian money.
Nigeria's film industry, Nollywood, has come a long way. From the days of poor quality films hurriedly put together on tight budgets, the industry has since recorded tremendous growth and now attracts some big budget productions. The quality of films has also improved significantly. The Black Book is set to further boost the profile of an industry many believe is still far from attaining its full potential. Deji Badimosi, CGTN, Lagos.
All right, then a quick run through commodity prices. Let's start in the world of coffee. Prices over there still holding orbit around $2.25 in New York today, still at multi-year highs, essentially. Brent crude futures have been weakening steadily in November. That's an interesting trend. They actually have fallen by about 2% in the last 2 and a bit weeks. They've gone as low as $81.56 a barrel today. Since the start of the quarter, though, Brent's around 5.8, almost 6% higher. But the question still remains, can it hold on to those gains? The head of the EIA over in the United States was testifying before the American Senate. A little earlier, he argued that if some stocks from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve were released, it might potentially lower prices by about $2 a barrel. Now, let's move on to Nigeria. The black African olive is pretty popular across rural communities over there, where it's used for various sorts of first aid. Even urban dwellers are turning to it, and herbal plants of that ilk for some of their healthcare needs. That in turn has made plants like the African olive sell a lot faster, and some Nigerians are sensing a business opportunity. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam on grassroots.
It's production day for Kanki Yusuf. The graduate of mass communication started processing and packaging African olive oil for sale 6 years ago. From the proceeds, Kanki was able to support herself through school. She has since expanded production by over 800% and now makes an average $200 on each supply.
I needed a extra source of income, and so I thought of this. I started with like 3 bottles. I would always send for my dad to get maybe 2 or 3 bottles. Then I would sell to some of the lecturers that knows the importance of this oil. Subsequently, I added because I really needed the income at that point, and because of the health benefit, I figured out why not just try, and it's something I can get from some of the villages I know. I have like 6 people supplying for me in different villages.
The African olive is famous across Nigeria and other African countries. Farming the crop is an ancestral trade for the likes of 30-year-old Nenman Chalkop. Not only does he make a living from it, he treats his children with the oil extracts as well.
It has numerous importance. It works well on poison. If you are poisoned and you take it, you will vomit the poison. It heals burns, it heals pile, especially in children. We apply it on snake bites, scorpion stings, and it works like magic. It helps us a lot. In fact, it's our first aid. If our children fall ill, that's what we administer to them. If it's beyond the oil, we sell the oil, use the money, and take them to the hospital.
From treatment of intestinal worms and gastrointestinal diseases to dermatological care, many rural and urban dwellers are turning to organic and more natural remedies to ailments. Producers like Kanke believe that with government and private sector support, businesses like hers would be able to expand to meet local and international demands, and that would in turn increase employment and boost the nation's foreign exchange earnings through exports. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Jos Plateau, Nigeria.
Quick update on the currencies, this time with a focus on East Africa. The interbank sell-side rate for the Kenyan shilling, 112.07, lowest on record. The depreciation of the Kenyan shilling has been relatively slow, but it does compound the imported inflation problem that the East African net oil importer has to deal with, in addition to other issues like drought and below average rainfall in parts of the country. Now, over the weekend, the government actually chose to absorb a rise of 11% and 15% in petrol and diesel prices. Fuel retailers will be paid the difference in funds that the state has raised and has been stashing away through taxes on fuel. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content we've seen on the program in the last hour. Many ways you get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. Well, today's up next from Washington, D.C.